So I just want to introduce, my name is Mary Scholl. I should change my name here. And from the Institute for Collaborative Learning. And I am super happy that everybody has come. Tonight, Matt Schaefer, one of our fellows at the Institute, is going to share this amazing webinar about accelerated learning and the flipped classroom. He's done it 9 times. This is his 10th time to offer it. So he could do it in his sleep, but I asked him to not sleep through his presentation. This webinar is sponsored, it was funded as part of a project by the U.S. Embassy here in Costa Rica and supported by the Alianza para Bilinguismo and the Ministry of Public Education. And it was designed by Matt in consultation with everyone. And we're super excited to have him giving this. We're grateful to the Embassy and to the MEP and to the Alianza para Bilinguismo. Also grateful to Ivan Suazo, who's our support and tech person tonight. Along with myself, if you need anything, Ivan's here, I'm here, we'll help you out. And looking forward to learning with and from Matt. So thanks, Matt.
Thanks so much, Mary. I also want to say thank you to the U.S. Embassy in San Jose and the Ministerio de Educación Pública in Costa Rica and the Alianza para el Bilinguismo for collaborating and helping us create this space to bring teachers together to talk about teaching, which I think is so important now more than ever. I also want to say thank you to all the teachers who are here. I know as teachers, you work busy lives. Your work comes home with you as homework and tests to grade, as lessons to plan, and as students to care about in your off hours. So I know your schedules are full then with your own personal lives too, and I really appreciate the time you've taken to be with us here today. I see the time and energy that you're putting in today as a gift that you are giving to your students and to your schools and your communities. So I want to say thank you on behalf of all of them for the time and effort you're giving today. I'd like to get into it now with all of you. So, hi everyone, my name is Matt. I've been working in the field of English as a second language education for around 10 years now. For a little over half that time, I lived down at the Centro Espiral Maná in El Limbo de Peñas Blancas. It's legalmente San Ramón, pero San Carlos de Corazón. That's how I like to describe it. It's a hot and humid part of the Centro Valley of Costa Rica. And while I was there, I taught students between the ages of 2 and 72 every week. And so though I haven't been working directly in the public school system, I've seen myself as a teammate with public school teachers. You would finish teaching your classes on Fridays and toss your students off to the weekend, and I'd catch them gently and work with them on Saturdays and Sundays in our kids program, English Alive, and then toss them back to you on Monday. So it's nice to meet those of you for whom I haven't met, but whom are teammates in the raising of our children together. And nice to also be forming connections of others of you out there who are teammates as well. So I'd love to get into it and talk about our topics for today. The title of this webinar is Making the Most of the Work We Do, Flipped Learning Inside and Out of MEP Classrooms. Now, when I talk about making the most of the work we do, I'm thinking about working towards accelerated learning, which is a buzzword I've started hearing a lot more, especially in this post-pandemic educational landscape. And as we explore that concept of accelerated learning, one hands-on technique we're going to talk about is flipped learning, which is how to flip a classroom. And what is this concept of independent work? So that's what I hope to start exploring today in the next 2 hours. And then starting in the next few weeks, we'll have another session of this webinar where we'll go deeper into the topics and come up with specific ideas of how to work with these concepts in high and low tech settings. So we're going to start out with some doing. I know Mary said this is the 10th time I've led this workshop, but there are some things I've never done because I'm going to have you do them. We're going to start out with some sharing and a survey on Mentimeter. So you all can share your ideas and we can come together and see where we're at. We're also going to have a flipped experience. So before I tell you about something, I'm going to put you in the learner's chair and let you try this experience out and see what it feels like to learn in this flipped way. Once we've done that, we'll think about how to integrate this concept alongside a public school curriculum? How can I take curricular documents that I've been given by my Ministry of Education and work with them and flip elements of that? How can I adapt process while maintaining that curricular content? And then at the end, we'll have some takeaways, a question and answer, and definitely stick around to the end. That's when we'll be sending out our attendance and final survey. We'd love to get a record of you all being here so that we can go and connect with the people around the region and tell them how many interested teachers are out here wanting to learn more about teaching and use your curiosity to create more spaces like this. So look out for that attendance link later. Now, like I said, let's get into it. We're going to go into a Mentimeter. So I'm going to send out a link in chat that you can click on, and that will open in a separate browser window, this website Mentimeter. So you can click on that and it'll take you over to the Mentimeter presentation that you can see on the screen. Also, if you want to access on a different device like your phone, you can follow the instructions at the top of the screen. Go to menti.com and type in the number 3397795. Once you click on that link or enter in that code on menti.com, you'll come to these interactive questions. On the Zoom screen, you can see, how are you feeling today? And the words that are starting to pop up are what the 5 of you who have already answered this slide, now 7 have shared. So please take some time. We're going to be in Mentimeter for about the next 15 or 20 minutes. So if it takes a minute or two to get set up, that's all right. We'll be on this landing question page for about a minute or two, just to give everyone time to get to Mentimeter. So please join us if you can. Click on the link or go to menti.com on your phone and type in the 7-digit code on the top of the Zoom screen. It's great to the 10 of you who've made it out. I see that those of you who've made it to Mentimeter so far are feeling happy, good, and great. Someone's excited about the webinar. Me too. Yes, we are also, Diego's asking if it'll be possible to watch a recording later. We're adapting one of the recordings of this session and adding in some moments of interactive fun, and we'll have that uploaded to YouTube along with all of the links and resources that we'll be sharing with you today. So stick around. We don't want to lose you. If your Wi-Fi goes out, you'll be able to come back in. And if you love what you hear, you can share it with your friend and they can do this webinar asynchronously. So we really want to get as much as we can out there and do as much sharing and connecting as we can. Wonderful to see even more people feeling excited and excellent, happy, tired. I know a lot of our teachers connecting from Costa Rica have a vacation coming up. To the teachers from elsewhere in the world, do you all have a mid-year vacation coming soon? Is that why I'm seeing an overly large number of exciteds and happies? I hope many of us have vacations coming soon.
I hope so. Everybody's rest.
I'm glad to see 20 of you have made it to Mentimeter. If anyone's just joining, I'm going to go to our chat again and send out a link to this interactive survey that we are all working on together. For the next 15 minutes or so, we'll be in Mentimeter sharing our ideas. If you can't get to Mentimeter, also feel free to answer the questions you can in the Zoom chat and we'll read those out loud too. So we want to give you space to share. I'm going to start clicking ahead through Mentimeter. So those of you who are here, all 21 of you, can start answering our questions. If you're still working on getting connected, feel free to ask a question in the chat. If you ask for some tech support, we've got some I4CL fellows here who can jump in and help you get to Mentimeter. Now, our next question page is a self-assessment. And I want you to think about the 2 topics that we're going to talk about, the flipped classroom and accelerated learning. What can you explain about the concept, about planning and implementing? And are you curious about these 2 topics? Take a moment to use these sliders to pre-assess where you're at in terms of our 2 main focuses for this webinar. It's exciting to see that number climbing. We've just hit 75 people. Thank you to those of you teachers just joining. I imagine a lot of you have been racing home from work and balancing life in between your commutes. So I'm glad you've made it here. Hope you had a chance to breathe and take a moment of peace somewhere in your busy day. We're currently working in Mentimeter. If you'd like to join us in this interactive survey, you can follow the instructions on the top of the screen, go to menti.com and type in that 7-digit code. And right now we're doing a self-assessment. So I'm seeing that for those of the 13 of us who've answered so far, there's a limited amount of knowledge around the concepts and planning related to flipped classroom and accelerated learning. Some people have pretty low idea. Some people have a moderate idea, and a few folks who feel like experts. But there's a lot of interest about both of these topics, which has me excited. I'm excited to see what we can do with that curiosity. We've discovered that there are these things, and we've discovered we don't know about them. And now we can take that curiosity and use it to create some momentum to move towards learning. So that's what I'm going to try and stir up with y'all today. I'm going to keep clicking forward here. My next question that I have for you is, on average, how many minutes of English class do your students have each week? I know in Costa Rica, the typical class is around 40 minutes. So we have minutes there and the number of classes, and that breaks down to around a 40-minute class. So when you get to this slide, feel free to answer about whatever is average for you of how many minutes a week your students have English class. Up here, we're thinking about how many minutes a week our students have of English class. As we talk about working efficiently and maximizing what we're getting out of our instructional minutes today, in one part, that's one of the ways we're going to be looking at these topics. I want to have an idea of what we're thinking about. And I'm seeing a really interesting spread here. It sounds like there's a big core group of folks here today who are meeting with students every single day of the week, 5 days a week for 40 minutes or more, which is awesome. And then there's another around third of us or so who are on the lower end of the spectrum, who might have around half as many minutes. And so I think it's interesting to recognize where you might be at on that spectrum and just think about what that might mean of how you might need to tap into these skills in different ways. I especially think when we get to thinking about accelerated learning, these concepts might be even more important in those lower minute instructional environments because your students are trying to cover just as much language in even less time. The other half of this equation that I want to share out with you, thanks to the 28 of you who've made it here so far in Mentimeter, is on average, how many minutes a week of English homework do you assign? Now, I don't want you to think about Andreita, who's always asking for extra homework and doing things twice because she loves English so much. And I don't want you to think about Darol, who has never turned in homework in his life. Think about how much homework you assign. What's the average amount of independent work students are doing at home each week for your class? So it's interesting to see on this graph. I'm also seeing our big chunk right around that 15-minute mark. I think a lot of that, I would say, is probably in line with what we've been seeing as more or less the national average for the primary teachers from Costa Rica in the other 9 webinars. The average that we were hitting was around that 200 minutes of class a week with around 15 minutes of homework per week, which falls more or less in the guidelines of minutes established by MEP. Even in those groups, there were outliers with less class or more homework. And it looks like among the group of teachers we have joining us from other parts of the region, we have some context with less instructional minutes, but also I'm seeing a lot more people who are doing more independent work. So it's interesting to think about, one of the questions we're considering today is what do students do at home? And so I think especially for those contexts of teachers who have lower time at home, but are trying to balance out more at-home learning, I think I'm really excited to pick your brains and see how you think this will fit with your students. Roxana's adding in chat that most of the work in her class is done in class, and that twice every term there's some summative homework. So the homework is more synthesis that's done at regular intervals versus step by step by step. So interesting to think about too. We have different ways we can use that time at home and that time at school. And as we consider that, we might be able to find ways to work more effectively with our context and resources. So the next question I have for you is an open question. You can add in a response and you can reply to this one multiple times. So as you're sharing what kinds of activities and tasks you assign as homework, you can write one idea like worksheets and then hit enter and add another idea like watch Super Simple Songs YouTube channel. So whatever you are sharing. You've got an early lead taken away by oral presentations here. But also some video lessons at home. I'm interested, have you created video lessons and your students do your video lessons? Seeing some nodding, that's cool, Marilla. That sounds like make it once and you kind of work hard through that, and that semester is super hard, but then everyone that comes after that, you're like, oh man, thank you past me for doing so much great work for future me. I got some other teachers who've added in that they like to work on writing tasks, watching a movie, maybe doing something related to the lesson, working on other content. A couple more people thinking about oral presentations. Maybe at the end of our task cycles, students are doing some of that preparation for productive work, or writing essays, right? When students have larger chunks of language to create, maybe doing some of that at home. Doing some kind of virtual game. So leveraging this shift towards technological resources and seeing what we can do at home using technology, even if learning has come back into the classroom. Those tablets or phones that students have found ways to work into their educational landscape, how can we use those too? A lot of worksheets. Nice. All righty. I'm going to go on to our next question. If you're just joining us, I think our number has been hovering around the same, but if there's anyone new out there, you can find a link in chat to join us on Mentimeter, add into an interactive survey, and share your ideas with us. In chat, Mariela added that, we already talked about one too. She added the same idea as Roxana in terms of assignments. So now thinking about designing and choosing homework tasks, what questions or challenges do you face in your context? So think about working with your students and what they do at home. What are your questions or challenges that you hope to explore today? Time frame. And that big question of like, what activities can be done alone? That's something I've been thinking about a lot recently too. Thinking about timing is super important. I remember in my master's program, there was one professor who had a reputation for giving the most homework. And it made it challenging because other professors knew they had to give less homework to balance it out, right? A student only has so many minutes at home. And so we do have to be respectful and think about time at home is a limited resource. Even if I design something that works and it's something that students can do independently, what's that limited resource of time that my students do have at home? Whether it's 15 minutes or up to around 60 minutes, like our range for today. How to get students motivated by the task? Absolutely. I think especially when I think about young learners, there's this unwritten agreement that kids and adults have, right? At least I know when I was a kid, I thought about the world this way. I go to school Monday through Friday, morning to afternoon. I do whatever the adults tell me. Then I go home and play, right? Like that was how I interacted with the world. That was my place in the world. And so when I'm giving students something to do at home, I'm coming into that space that in my student's mind might be a more playful or a less structured space. So I'm not just competing to be the most fun class out of sociales or matemáticas and just having the English room be the fun one. I'm now competing against the PlayStation, the soccer ball, and the cell phone. And so I've got to get a homework assignment that fits in and is motivating with really heavy competition, right? That question of parent knowledge and support, right? I think that really ties into what students can do alone. Some students have support at home, and it's great to be able to tap into that. Some students don't. And so it also creates this really big gap in terms of available resources, especially with young learners and their motor abilities or their abilities to access technology. All right, we're nearing the end of our presentation here. I want to get a little bit of a sense about technology in your classrooms. I'm curious now that we've worked through some years of distance learning, what our educational landscape looks like. So in this question, you can choose more than one category. And first, I want to know about your classroom experience. Do you have access to devices? Do you have access to internet when you're in the classroom? What are your classroom settings like? And if you teach at more than one school, you can check more than one box. Access to devices, but limited internet. Okay, it's nice to think about. So we have to be judicious in how we use the internet. I think my years of commuting by bus and bouncing from saldo card to saldo card really taught me that skill of like, how do I use data in a really efficient way? And so if I have access to devices, I might be able to do something, but I've got to think about also that added layer of the limited resource of data, right? A video might be great, but if that uses way more data than just using an audio, it might mean it won't download when it comes time to download it in the middle of class. So that added layer there of, I have the tech, it's right in front of me, but I have to be really careful about how much data I'm using. Or potentially like SWAD and others are adding, I have no internet, right? I have these cool things, but they're really limited in what they can do. Or potentially even like some people are saying, I don't have any access to devices. So I also want to think about your students' home environment. I know this is a big guess, so just use your estimation skills. You'll slide all of these bars to add up to 100% overall. So think about the students you work with and what percentage do you think fall into each category of what students have access to at home? This question always gets me like, it gets my brain ticking in such interesting ways because I look at the results and I like think about the challenge on me as a teacher there, right? I know that the internet can be access to this incredible bounty of resources, right? Like I love Googling and trying to find a great video or a worksheet that's already been made and like using materials that I can find that fit my learning needs of my students. And I know not 100% of my students have access to that. And especially if I'm working in a public school system, I need to make sure my students are having equal opportunity. So I've got to be careful about what I do that's only available with technology, because those kinds of things don't meet that tenet of equal opportunity, right? It's really got me thinking, and this is something that'll come back up later, but maybe having this in mind as we think about things coming forward. How do I use technology as an option so that my students who are up in that category, that half of them that have lots of internet at home, they can really take advantage of that? But then there's some kind of option for my students who don't, so they can still be motivated and do something on their own. I'm really thinking about that. And also because that's what we're going to be getting into in the next webinar as well. But I'm seeing the really crucial piece of that optionality as we think about this very real challenge. Like the two biggest chunks we have are, yeah, there's a lot of internet, or no, there isn't. You know, so what do we do when some students can access YouTube and others can't? In terms of time, I think I'm actually going to tap out of these last two questions. Feel free to add your answers, and you can come back and answer this Mentimeter survey later and see what other people have added. But we're going to do some talking around these same ideas a little bit later. So if you could wrap up your time in Mentimeter and come back with us to Zoom, we're all done in Mentimeter for the day. So you can close that window and say goodbye. Thank you for sharing. I think it's nice when these calls get up to 85 people. It can sometimes be hard to hold space for everyone to share when we're just using microphones or chat gets crazy. And so I really like Mentimeter in that I feel like it helps pull people up out of their seats. Especially in a Zoom class where taking turns talking can be a little bit harder. Now, I'd like to have a flipped experience with you. So you're going to work independently with a curated set of resources. And I'm going to give you 10 minutes. So I want you to see how many of the following 4 challenge tasks you can complete. There are 2 challenge tasks related to the flipped classroom and 2 challenge tasks related to accelerated learning. I want you to see if you can discover what's an explanation of one or both of these concepts, and what's an example of how you might bring one of these classrooms to life in, or one of these concepts to life in your classroom. So click on the link in the Zoom chat, and that's going to open up this Wakelet. It's a really quick website that I was able to create with a collected set of resources. You can see here there's 4 columns with videos and articles about accelerated learning, as well as videos and articles about the flipped classroom. So I'm going to stop talking and give you 10 minutes of solitude. And I want you to explore and see how much you can discover. If you want to take a little bit of time to read about both topics, you can. If you want to focus on just one topic, you can too. I recommend the videos or articles at the very top first. I tried to put the most succinct and concise resources in the first position. So I'll stop talking. If you need some tech support, reach out to us in chat. And I'm going to give you 10 minutes to explore, and then we will come back together and talk about the answers we've discovered to these 4 questions afterwards. So enjoy your flipped experience.
Matt, can I just add one more thing?
Yeah, of course, Mary.
I just want to highlight, please do this. This is your experience of being sort of flipping the classroom. And if you do it, then you can participate and we can really explore. So this is really an opportunity to feel what that's like for yourself. So we're really hoping that you'll do it. It's funny in our Zoom world sometimes, and sometimes when people come to these webinars, they think they're not going to do anything, they're just going to listen. But we really need you to do this in order for you to get the sense of the experience. So thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Mary. We've got 80 participants here, and that's 10 minutes. So if we all dive deep into this, that's 800 minutes of focused teacher brain reading. That's over 15 hours of reading work. So we could all become really quick experts on these 2 topics if we dive in and have a rich discussion. So I've got 5:10 on the clock California time. That's 6 Central America, and probably sometime after that wherever you are. But that's 10 on the minute hand. So when we get to 20 on the minute hand, that's when we'll come back together and discuss these 4 questions. I promised I would stop talking. I know how to, so I'm going to stop talking now. You've got 10 to explore these topics, and then we'll share it together. All right, everyone. I hate to interrupt your curiosity and exploration. I'd love to bring you all together in Zoom so we can share what we've learned and learn from one another. So first, let's talk about the flipped classroom. Does anyone have an explanation of a flipped classroom in their own words that they'd like to share either out loud or in chat? Or an example of how to flip part of a classroom? If you want to share either of those things out loud or in chat, love to hear what you've discovered about the flipped classroom.
Okay.
To share. Yeah.
Let's see if I understood. I think that the flipped classroom is okay. So they learn like the theory of a certain subject through videos and blogs, and then they reinforce that they have learned or watched through homeworks that they do in the classroom.
Nice. That's a great understanding, Kayla. Yeah. So in the flipped classroom, like the buy the book way, if you go to theflippedclassroom.com and buy the flippedclassroom.com book, Yeah, you do blogs and videos at home, and that's where students encounter new information. And they might even start doing some clarification at home. But then they come into school, and that's where they're doing active practice. They start clarifying and remembering what they learned at home on their own. In a more general term, like what Junior added in chat, it's all about changing roles in terms of what is done at home and what's done in the class, right? Karina sums it up too, that it's thinking about this combination now we have between what's traditional and what's virtual. I think it's interesting that across the last 2 years, we've really discovered we can do a lot more in the house. Like, it doesn't just have to be what we did when we were kids. When I was a kid, I never zoomed into school or like did a packet of resources that my teacher gave me every month. Like, those weren't things that I did. But we've had this generation of students who've discovered these new ways of being at home. So how can we come back to this question of what do we do at school and what do we do at home if we're more open-minded about what we can do? Marbella adds that, yeah, there's a lot of preparation at home, right? I want to get the students right up to the point where they need a teacher. And that's what I want to do at home, right? All the way up until it gets too hard for them. And that's right where I want the homework task to finish. And then they come into the classroom where they have me there. And that means they can do the time. Like just now, when y'all were reading, I was sitting there like, man, what do I do? In some of the first webinars, I tried to play background music and they were like, Matt, stop DJing, we're watching videos. So like in that moment, you don't really need me to discover new things. You can get input without the teacher being there. So we take these moments of input and we can flip them. A lot of you are adding ideas in the chat, and it's all in with this. It's a way of creating a blended mode of learning, right? Approaching it from this question of what do I want to have students do without me, and what do I want to have them do with me? And technology can be a big way that at-home piece works. But I want to go beyond the flipped classroom and go to flipped learning. What can we learn from this high-tech approach? And how can we use it in the school we work at in the indigenous region of our country where we don't have any access to technology, if that's where you're teaching? So I want to think about the concepts and then pull away the pieces of technology and see how we can do these processes in any of our situations that we're in. And yeah, Isabella, you can already see that this is kind of leading to what we get in sort of a jigsaw activity. I'd love to flip our jigsaw over to the other half of our puzzle, accelerated learning. Does anyone have something they want to share out loud or in chat about accelerated learning? When I first heard the term accelerated learning, my response initially was, are you kidding? I didn't know what it was, but I heard someone say the term accelerated learning and I was like, oh, great. I know how we'll fix the education gap. Teachers will just teach faster. And I was thinking, have you ever tried teaching faster? You like look at your watch and there's 5 minutes left and you've got 15 minutes of lesson plan and you just try to do everything. Those are the worst moments of my class when I'm trying to teach faster. So that was my initial reaction when I first heard the term accelerated learning. And I've really shifted my understanding of what that term means from my gut reaction to now having read more of these articles, watched these videos, and talked with all of you. Alicia adds that accelerated learning is about focusing on skills and content that students absolutely need, right? One of the big skills in accelerated learning is prioritization, right? I remember a worksheet I've seen a lot. And it was an old worksheet, but my students would bring to me and say, profe, tengo un examen, necesito ayuda con estudiar, por favor, un clase extra. Y le pago con mamones chinos. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to say no. They're too delicious. And they'd show me their worksheet and it would be 50 different kitchen verbs: slice, dice, fillet, chop, cube. And I was like, I can't even do half of those with a knife. How would I even teach that? Like, I don't know how to cube something. I bet I could try, but my first cubed potato is going to be real bad. And so I looked at that worksheet and thought, man, there's so much here that if I just taught my student the word cut and they were really good with the word cut, they could probably get by in the kitchen. Once they get hired working with a chef in a kitchen, oh, their vocabulary is going to be way better than mine in the kitchen. But I can give them the word cut today and wait until they have that job to learn the other things. And that skill that I remember from time and time ago is one of this big ideas of accelerated learning, right? What are the skills necessary in the content I have that are necessary for what's coming in the future, right? Like Marvella's adding, it's very tied to future learning, right? Although this unit is about cooking, the moment we're out of the cooking unit, do my students need to know how to say slice, dice, cube, and fillet? Or after this unit is the only word they really need cut? Because if that's the only word they're going to need longer term, then I can reduce the content in that unit and just focus on what's most necessary, right? Because if I focus on less content, I get to go slower with it. If I have 1 hour and 50 words, I've got 1 minute and 3 seconds per word. But if I have 1 hour and 10 words, I've got 6 minutes per word. I've got a lot more time I can really dig into each of these pieces of information with my students and get them active and at the center of learning. So yeah, Roxana, this is a lot connected to what you've been doing through the pandemic. A lot of what MEP in Costa Rica has been having you do with looking at content and making prioritization lists. It's a further development of that skill. And so we recognize that if you look at like all of the content of a unit, which we're going to do later today, I'm going to put up all of the vocabulary from one unit. And we're going to practice together how to prioritize, how to say, okay, here's 20 topics. What are the 2 that I want to plan in my first lesson? What are the 2 most important things here? And starting with the most important stuff and going slowly through that. Can we do that in public schools? At least I can't speak to your exact system, Senia. I know that this is what MEP Costa Rica is asking us to talk about. So we recognize the reality that you've got students coming in post-pandemic and they've been out of the classroom for 2 years. Maybe they didn't have access to technology, so they really haven't been going to classes, which means not only are they 2 grade levels behind in terms of content, but any regression that might have happened in that time has them even further behind, right? So we're working with a very unique generation of students. And one of the things we as teachers need to be ready to do is say, I can't keep planning them with the exact same ideas I had before the pandemic, right? Because where I thought my 3rd graders would be and where the 3rd graders I actually have are 2 very different things. So I can't just keep using the exact same plans in the same way and going, yeah, no, it's going to work, because my context is different now. All of our contexts are different now. So the thing that really got me when I started reading about accelerated learning, I read the first couple articles that are here in Wakelet, and it was this idea that one of the ways you accelerate learning is by going more slowly. I was like, what? How is going slower going to help? Now, let's say I've got a student who comes to me and they're in 3rd grade, but they're not ready for the 3rd grade material. So I take the 3rd grade material away from them and I give them 2nd grade material, and they can do it. And they're happy and they're feeling successful, and I'm feeling good because they're being successful. Well, at the end of 3rd grade, they're going to finish the 2nd grade book. And when they go off to their next teacher, the next teacher is going to have the same problem that you have. If I respond to students being below grade level by giving them activities below grade level, my students will never catch up. It is one thing I can do. One thing I can do as a teacher is lower the difficulty of content. But if I do that, my students are never going to catch up. They're just going to graduate high school at a 6th to 10th grade level. So this concept of accelerated learning is saying, okay, you've got a student, and for them to accomplish all of the content of 3rd grade is beyond their ability. Where they're starting the year, they're not high enough to finish all of the 3rd grade content in 1 year. So instead of giving them 2nd grade content, what if you focus on the 75% of 3rd grade that's most important for 4th grade? Or the 50% of the vocabulary? Look at the 10 words for this unit and decide, I'm going to skip 5 of them. 5 of them are only important in this unit. And I'm going to spend the same amount of time working on just the key words. And so by giving the students a little bit less of all of the 3rd grade, we can make it possible. We're reducing grade level content instead of giving below grade level content. Because language is sticky. And if students learn half of what they were supposed to learn in 3rd grade, over time, they're going to be hearing the words they might have missed. And those words in context are slowly going to stick to their knowledge, and they can pick those words up later. They don't have to get them in 3rd grade. They can get them in the future. So when you've got those students who are behind, we want to focus in on what they're working on. So before we move into thinking about how to do this with taking a curricular idea and putting it into practice with some flipping, I want to think about that flipped experience with you. You just did 10 minutes of independent work to discover these topics. Do you feel like that was an effective spending of time? Did you learn something about the flipped classroom or accelerated learning during those 10 minutes? And if so, what resources helped you learn? Or is there anything you needed from me? What are your thoughts after doing that flipped experience? One thing I noticed, I think it was Kayleen who, Kayleen, you have something you want to share? I was just about to talk about you, but you can talk about you first.
Sorry.
No, go.
Something that really caught my attention was what was it? The fast learn accelerated learning. Is that sometimes with my students, and they're like wondering, teacher, why do we have to cover certain topics that we think are not worthless, but not so interested as any other topics? And usually, based on my experience, I try to cover almost everything within my study plan instead of, okay, as it says, well, prioritize what is important and what I really need them to learn for them to advance to the following level. So, based on these two new concepts for me, I think I will start to prioritize certain topics, because really, as you said, I mentioned before, these two years that have gone by, that really like set them back. So we really get them to a point where they can, okay, I think that I have more or less the basic tools to master what is coming.
Yeah. So when I was teaching for years, Kayleen, our school was 30 minutes from La Fortuna. And if you've worked near a tourist hub like that, you know what the teenage students come in and tell you is conversational English is worth more to me than a college degree. Right. And so I knew my job as a teacher wasn't, you need to learn how to say every bird in the forest in English. It was, you need enough English to get past that interview. The moment you get hired as a tour guide, your English is going to skyrocket from there, right? My students who'd come to me after a year of working, they quadrupled their knowledge in English in 1 year compared to the years they spent studying, right? Because they're doing it with purpose every day. So I realized I don't have to teach everything. I just have to get the students what's necessary for what's coming. And we can take that same concept that works when we're thinking about something hands-on, like a job interview, and bring it into our classroom and saying, I might not have time to teach everything that's in the 3rd grade textbook, right? I know that's the ideal, that I can, but the reality of where I'm at this year might be that I can't. And so this is a strategy to still be effective when we have to deviate from that ideal plan. How to reduce the amount of grade level content and work with it. And this flipped experience connects into that, right? Because like we did this together, so you only had 10 minutes. But if I had given to you this to you before the webinar, and you were in the middle of an article you were really enjoying, you might have done 15 minutes. You might have finished watching that video and gone to 20. So it's also giving the option for more time. If my student has the curiosity and motivation, they can do more time to do more catching up too. In chat, Marvella was adding that she appreciated the diversity between having articles and videos, but maybe having a specific task before the reading or watching could have helped. Interesting to think about. I know for me, it helps me in that I didn't have to talk and tell you exactly what the flipped classroom was. The first thing I did was confirm for Kayleen. The first comment that was shared was Kayleen's own definition of it. So my first interaction with the learner was Kayleen already clarifying her knowledge, right? When I'm thinking about learning, if I'm using this like ECRIF framework, right? My students have already encountered that content and she comes to me ready to start clarifying. So I can see, wow, the first step of learning that I'm working for, of students discovering what they're going to learn about, that's already been done. And if I do that before the webinar, now the moment my clock starts ticking, I'm already on step 2, right? That's where my students are ready for. They're ready to start saying, is this right? I read this and I'm unsure. Checking their knowledge against mine is students clarifying that. It's them finishing that pre-task preparation and getting ready to start doing that controlled practice of task rehearsal. So another thing I want to think about with you is that these pictures to me really fit into our world several years ago. This is actually a picture from several years ago on the left of schoolwork at our school in Centro Espinal. It's 3 students sitting around the table working on a group project. And several years ago, yeah, that's what schoolwork looked like. And on the right, my nephew Emmanuel, he's drawing at home. And that might be what homework looks like for him at his young learner stage. But we've just passed through a 2-year period that looked sort of like this, where schoolwork was home schoolwork and homework was home homework. And so I think this word homework is really limiting, because the big difference now isn't where are students doing this, because we might at some point go back to teaching online again for another reason. We have started developing the skills. The big difference between what my student is doing in the classroom and at home isn't just where they are, it's who they're with. And so I want to keep talking with you about this concept of independent work. That's what I've started trying to make the shift of my own talking about my teaching. I'm trying to stop using the word homework because I think it gets me focused on the wrong part of it. I want to focus on the fact that my student is independent. That's what I want at the center of my mind when I'm planning and creating these moments of independent work. Because I think that plays to the reality of my context. My student is alone. What can they accomplish effectively? And then they can come in school and they can do things with the support of their peers and the support of me and my feedback. And that dichotomy really starts me seeing that, oh, I can do the easier tasks independently and then work up to the more challenging tasks in school. Now, let me talk you through a very common experience I've had in my teaching. On the board is a visual that I use when I'm working with a task cycle, like in the MEP of Costa Rica's action-oriented approach. Or even really, I think it applies also to thinking about something like an ECRIF or PDP lesson plan cycle as well, where I start out with some sort of pre-task and preparing. And one thing I've found as I've done these classes is that this is usually where I start. My students come in on Monday and I start off with a new topic. All right, class, this week we're talking about food. Well, students vary in their amount of prior knowledge. And some students ask a lot of questions here. And oftentimes my pre-task takes a lot longer than I thought it would. Well, after that, students do need a chance for some controlled practice and some preparation through some controlled activities. So that's what I move into in task rehearsal next in the classroom. But again, students have different amounts of prior ability. And so some students need more practice than others before they're ready rehearsing for the task and ready to start doing the task. That's that fluency focus at the end of my cycle. So again, my task rehearsal takes longer too. Now I get to the point at the end of Monday where our time is limited. And I look at my watch and I have 5 minutes left and I have two options. I can try to do a speaking task as fast as I can. Okay, everyone, I'm going to have you find a partner and talk to your partner about what you did yesterday. And then I'm going to have you find another partner and talk to your partner about what your first partner did yesterday. And then you're going to talk to the third partner about what your first partner and second partner did yesterday. And everybody's like, go, switch. Thank you very much. Goodbye. I don't know if you've ever tried to do the 5-minute fluency activity. I have, and I have had zero success with that. So the other thing I've also tried is, alrighty, everyone, we ran out of time for what I did plan. So I need you to go home and do the rest as homework. Whatever's left over at the end, that becomes the homework. I have a question for you. Are either of those two scenarios something you found happening in your classroom, where your pre-task and task rehearsal might take longer than you planned for, and then you're rushed during the task at the end and you either do it too quickly or you assign that task as homework? Kaylin, you're raising your hand. What would you like to share?
Because you mentioned all of that, and I was laughing because I was like, that always happens to me and my coworkers. We are like, okay, we came with a topic in mind. We started like talking about it and started with the rehearsing and things like that. And then they will start like, teacher, they have a lot of questions or they want to share different experiences, more or less the one that do dare to raise their hand and speak up. And then when you're trying like, okay, let's see how are we gonna approach the topic, and you start like to rehearse, and it takes a lot of time, but a lot of time. And by the end of the day, when you're trying to really go like to the activity that you had planned, there's not enough time, and you're like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? So I was like, oh, it happens to us a lot of times. So we started like discussing and talking among ourselves and saying, okay, guys, we need to see how we're gonna like prioritize certain learning and try them to focus on this. And we're gonna start with this activity, and we're gonna just dedicate this amount of time, minutes. But you try, and sometimes it gets out of hand. Either they're too invested, or something that happened that they have to go and eat their food or have something else. So there's any other thing that during the session. So it has me thinking like, what can I do?
Yeah,
to avoid
it's a totally challenging situation, Kayla, and I really connect with you, even in like the responses, right? I'm running out of time. What do? Do I set a timer and say, that's it, students, no more questions. We've run out of time for your curiosity. Like, is that going to help them learn more? You know, do I have to teach to the clock to make it fit in? What do I do when this keeps happening? And Mariela added indeed in chat as well. So I'm glad to hear this. And I'm also thinking about some of the answers you shared in Mentimeter and how you were talking about these ideas of that a lot of the work that students are doing as homework is oral presentations or creating posters. I saw a lot of things that sounded like those summative projects and tasks that are at the end of a lot of task cycles, at least in the MEP AOA. And I thought about another one of the challenges that you raised in that question on Mentimeter. What do I do when students' parents aren't there, right? Well, half of my students have an adult helping them, but the other half don't. And when I look at this board and I think, this is something that happens to me a lot. What is happening here? What's happening here is that what I'm sending home as homework is the hardest part of the lesson cycle, the task. That's my objective, my focus, the moment we're working towards, the moment I get to see the students putting everything into real world practice and doing it. And now I'm sending that moment home. So when my student is working on the hardest part of the lesson, they have the least amount of support available. I think that's why our students react really negatively to homework. I think when homework is dictated by the clock, homework, it gets too hard. Things that we originally designed for them to do with me standing by their side, now they're doing with no me standing by their side, which I hope means it's a lot harder for them. That means I'm a helpful thing to have next to them. And I think you're helpful when you're next to your students too. So I want to take this idea of flipping the classroom and say, can we use this strategy to avoid this problem, right? And yeah, like Lorna says, we get inspired. We want to dig into curiosity. So how can we use the flipped classroom to create, in a sense, a feeling of more time? I know you have a fixed amount of minutes. You've got those 200 minutes of class time, more or less was our average, and you've got that 15 to 60 minutes of homework, right? I think that's somewhere the range was usually some teachers who had around 120. There's around 200 to 250 minutes of class or of instructional minutes a week. So your students have that fixed resource. I think if we use that time differently, it might feel more effective, right? It's like if I pick up all of the dishes that are in my room and carry them to the kitchen at once, I'm going to spend less time doing the same task because I'm using my time more efficiently. So I want to flip, and I want to show you the parts of this task cycle that I would flip. First, we're going to talk generally about these in teacher talk words, and then we're going to look at some of the Costa Rican public school curriculum, and we're going to plan an actual flipped lesson using this concept. So when I'm thinking of something that might be independent work, the first thing of independent work I want to start off with in my lesson plan is step 1. I want the first thing students to do in this task cycle to be independent work at home. I want my students to do a noticing task when they watch a video. They watch a video about the target language and they have to notice and count how many times they hear a certain word, or what do they see in the picture. Or there's a few questions to try and get them brainstorming about the different colors. They're doing something to guide their attention towards encountering target language. And as they start getting confused, as they start having questions like, ¿Eso significa cuál? That's the moment I want to get them into the classroom, right then. So this task is what I'm going to assign over the weekend. A noticing task that's going to get the students curious and a little bit confused, so that when they come into class on Monday, the first thing we do together is they ask me their questions. That's what they bring in as evidence that they did homework that weekend. I'm going to have them write 3 questions on a sheet of paper, and they're going to bring me their questions, and I'll give them 5 points for having 3 questions. So the first thing we do in class on Monday, I have extra time for that question and answer session. Because instead of me hitting play on the projector and watching the students watch super simple songs, they don't need me to do that. I don't need to hear Daddy Finger again. I'm already going crazy with it enough. So I'm taking this moment of input and discovery and doing it at home first. And now I have some effective extra time in class for those questions. The next thing I'm going to do in class on Monday is 2 5-minute games that get my students doing some controlled practice. I'm going to start getting them moving towards production through some controlled practice. And maybe that's where I'll finish with this topic on Monday. Then maybe I'll send my student WhatsApp group a link for Quizlet and say, I want you to do at least 10 minutes of practice tonight in our class Quizlet. Is anyone going to do more than 10 minutes? Oh, Joanny is going to do 12 minutes. Oh, Abril is going to do 15. Pablo says he's going to do 20 minutes. So I give my students some kind of resource that they can play, like a video game on Quizlet. And that's another way I could flip something out to the classroom. I could give my students an interactive resource so they can take some controlled practice home. Maybe I'm in a low-tech setting. Maybe in class, one of my controlled practice activities is students making flashcards where they draw a picture on one side and write a word on another. And then they go home and they have to play with their flashcards for 10 minutes. And like I did when I was in choir, I bring in a card that says Matt, and it's my English practice card. and I say, I practiced from 4:15 to 4:25. And then my mom signs below it. And I say, here, teacher, I did my work practicing at home. And maybe that's the evidence that my students bring in of their independent practice at home. And so then if Giovanni did 20 minutes, he's going to get to bring in a paper and say, look, teacher, I did that. And that's another way that we can get some more effective minutes. If I can create some interactive way at home for students to do some controlled practice. Then they're going to come back in on Tuesday, and they're going to spend half of the class on Tuesday preparing for and doing their task. They brainstorm with a partner for their role play, and then they do their role play 4 or 5 times, and I go around listening to different groups doing it. So instead of racing through this lesson plan in one full Monday and having the hard part at the end become Monday night homework, I've done a little bit of prep work in Sunday night homework, a little bit of practice in Monday night homework, and I've used half of Monday for steps 2 and 3 and half of Monday for step 5. So that's how I might approach flipping a task cycle using the AOA. So now I want to do it in specific. I want to pull out real words from the real curriculum and plan a real lesson plan with you. I want to flip just step 1 because, like Junior said in the very beginning, this is really changing that approach to what do we do at home and what do we do in the classroom. This is a new culture of learning for students. So I can't come into school tomorrow and go, chicos, cuidado, porque ya vamos a flip, and make everything a flip. Like I can't do the 100% flipped classroom and it's all on vlogs starting tomorrow, no matter how excited I am, because that's going to be a culture shock for my students, a learning culture shock. So I want to plan with you a action-oriented approach lesson plan where we just flip out step 1. We come up with what's a task we can work towards and how can students start discovering for that language at home. So here's what we need. We need to first come up with a task. What is some communicative way my students can demonstrate new language ability? I want to plan a speaking class with you because I like speaking classes. I did a lot of theater growing up and I really get to tap into those skills when I lead speaking classes. So we need to come up with a task, and we also need to think, what is some new language that students can encounter independently at home using some kind of at-home input? Those are the 2 things we need to figure out. Well, I guess it's the task, the language, and the input. So 3. Let's start with the task. Well, when I'm working with the MEP curriculum and I'm trying to come up with a task, the place that I like to go is the goals box at the top of each unit. Each unit that's about, I think it's 6 to 8 weeks of classes, depending on how it lines up with your school's exact schedule, starts out with a bunch of goals that are sorted out by language skill. I find that since these goals are action-oriented, they're often can-do statements, and they really nicely transform into tasks. Well, I want to do a speaking task. So I'm going to zoom in on these speaking objectives. And in Segundo Ciclo, grade 4, unit 3, in this farm to table unit, the 3 speaking objectives are talk briefly about familiar topics, such as growing food and harvesting, describing basic aspects of day-to-day life, such as favorite foods or daily activities, and presenting with a group a topic sentence or 2 to 3 details. So my question for you is, especially those of you who have experience teaching this farm to table unit or something related to farming and agriculture, what is a speaking task, a fluency activity that we could put at the end of our lesson plan cycle that connects to these farm to table objectives? Do you have any idea that you've done in your classroom of a speaking task at the end of a farm to table unit that you want to share with us? Let us know in chat or open up your microphone.
Yeah, it could be like according to this topic that they can have like a small store and they can buy like things something like that.
Nice. We could have the students make like a small store with like little paper props, and they could do a role play where they're buying and selling agricultural goods. Nice. It's a great idea, Zinnia. Who else has an idea of a task we could do in this farm to table unit? What's something students could work towards? Mary got disconnected with her audio, but she was starting to share an idea that she'd shared with me a few days ago. In her town, right nearby in San Isidro, they've just started having a farmer's market where local farmers get together. Oh, there's Mary. Mary, you're back. I was starting to tell them about your idea.
You tell them my idea. My internet's going wonky tonight since this started.
No.
Yes,
Maria has added in chat, Mariela, they role play La Feria de Agricultura. They could be buying, exchanging, learning about money, and connecting to other topics. Yeah, great.
Yeah, that's exactly it. They could also role play anything having to do with food, whether at a store or a restaurant. That'd be really fun.
One of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently is that over the last 5 years, there's been this shift in our kids. When I moved to Costa Rica and started teaching, it was like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Futbolista. Like that was everybody. Everybody wanted to be futbolista. And now that same group, I'm like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they just go, YouTuber.
Yeah.
And like suddenly that's like the new futbolista is I'm going to have a YouTube channel, which is so funny to me. But I feel like that's motivation I can lean into, right? If my students are going to school near Mary and there's a new farmer's market, could I have my student go there with a phone and record a YouTube video and say, hey, we want you to make a video for tourists telling them all about the San Isidro farmer's market. And they go there and they're like, hello world, I'm Daryl, and this is the San Isidro farmer's market. We are here with local, and that video could be tapping into what this student sees as their future, right? So now they're doing farm to table on YouTube, right? And connecting that to their dream as well. So when I think about that idea, I
get them to TikTok now too.
Get them on TikTok. Yeah. I might have to download TikTok if I get my students on TikTok. But yeah, I'm tapping into that vibe of where they're at, and I'm creating something that's real world for them. Maybe I live in an agricultural region and interview a family member and tell the class about your family member. Maybe that feels very real to my students in the countryside. But if I'm teaching this same unit in the city, that same activity doesn't mean the same thing. One way that I can motivate students towards a task is connecting it to the real world, either talking to real people or making a real YouTube video that's on the real internet. Another way I can motivate students towards a task is the opposite, by connecting into the imaginary. Like what Zinnia was saying about a role play where the students get to pretend there's something beyond themselves. Or what I'm thinking about, which is the task I want to explore with you. I want to have students working in small groups to present an interview talk show in which a reporter interviews the animals who live on a farm. And the animals describe their day-to-day life and talk about a conflict. One thing I've found is that when I'm working towards a task, my students end up practicing the same kind of thing a lot. I'm imagining that in task rehearsal, they're going to do a lot of remembering and internalizing as they do controlled practice, thinking about the daily routines of farmers. So by the time we get to the end of this lesson, I can't keep doing exactly the same thing. I need to make a tiny twist, remix it in a way. So my remix idea is I want the kids to be animals. So instead of saying, what does the farmer do every day? Now we're going to use that same grammar and those same time chronology words to talk about what animals do. And now I'm starting to see a way that the students get to be silly and fun, and I'm the rooster, kikariki, and I'm the cow, boo. And now we're doing something funny for our friends. And I know my students like to make each other laugh. So I think I'm moving in a good direction with this. So work with me on that task. Let's think up, what new language will students need to do that task, right? I know that after about an hour of class time, I want to get my students doing that interview. They're going to spend part of that hour preparing, but that's what we're working towards. So what's the new language to discover and practice that's going to help them? I like to, on the MEP curriculum, go to that first column, learn to know. And it extends across several pages. So I've found it helpful to put it all in one place. This is all of the content from the Learn to Know column for all of Unit 3, Grado 4, Segundo Ciclo. This is a lot. This is where I need to bring in my accelerated learning brain. We've got 6 weeks for this. And my students are behind where I thought they would be when we'd be starting. So I know from the very beginning, I'm not going to be able to cover everything on this page. I'm going to have to choose something to skip. Whether I choose what to skip or I just try and teach everything and run out of time, something is going to get skipped. So I want to, instead of waiting to the end and finding out what gets skipped, I want to choose. What are we going to not focus on so that we have more time for everything else? To do that, I want to choose the most important stuff. So look with me quickly at this page. Do you see maybe 2 or 3 categories of language that connect to the interview role play and that you think are very, very important from this list here? What language here, what content is the most important that connects to our interview task? So Marbella found information questions and farm activities. Definitely, right? Here in this third column, we see WH questions. And that's going to give a lot of the structure of an interview, right? Hello, Mr. Cow. How are you today? Very happy. Mr. Cow, what do you like to do? I like to drink milk. Mr. Cow, where do you like to eat? I like to eat at McDonald's. Mr. Cow, what is your favorite food? My favorite food is hamburgers. Right? I can see how if I give my students WH question words and then work towards this interview role play, I'm going to give them the power to be silly and goofy and start thinking creatively of, what questions do I ask a cow? And what does a cow say to those questions? Are there any other pieces of language you see up here that might be really important? I saw these farm activities, Marbella, too. It sounds like one of the key pieces of content. But when I looked at these, I thought, these are definitely very much about the farmer. So I want to cover these at some point, but I might integrate these into my second task cycle. I might say, because the task I've designed for this cycle for my students doesn't involve what the farmers do, I'm not going to focus on this vocabulary today. Maybe if instead my task was interview a family member and then present a poster about your family member who works in agriculture, then I might definitely choose that vocabulary word. For now, I think both the WH questions and continuing to practice this present simple is going to be very important. And so I want to keep it to just that as my language focus. And I think my students need one other thing, so I'm going to throw in food. But I want to throw in food because I think my students know a lot of food. So I'm not going to focus on teaching new food. I'm going to skip that because you know what? My students in San Carlos, they don't know palm oil. But that's because in our specific region, there's not a lot of palm oil grown. We're in the foothills right there of the edges of the Central Valley. So we've got a lot of yucca, yampi, a lot of ornamental plants, and then bananas, pineapples, oranges, mangoes, but we don't have a lot of palm oil. So instead of taking time for me to teach children who live 100 miles away from the nearest palm oil farm how to say palm oil, I'm just going to say, my students know enough of this vocabulary. This is going to be the support language. And I'm going to focus on them discovering the WH questions and using the present simple and some food words to express about what they're working with. So, step 3, the last thing I need to figure out. How can my students get input at home to work on this independently? How can they discover and encounter the topic at home related to this? Well, in the MEP curriculum, every unit has these suggested mediation strategies. So I'm going to go to pre-teaching because this step 1 that I'm thinking about is the first part. It's part of the pre-teaching. And I'm going to look here for some ideas. I like the idea of puzzles and songs. I know that my 4th graders really like songs and puzzles. So I'm going to look for some way to create a puzzle connected to a song. Well, the first place I'm going to go is the YouTube. And I'm going to type into YouTube, WH questions, song ESL. I watched the first 5 videos and I knew all of them would not work. They were very, very slow. Where is Daddy Finger? Where is Daddy Finger? And if I show that video to my 9-year-old 4th graders, they're going to go, ay, profe, es que mi hermanito hace ese mismo video en su clase. And they're not going to want to watch it. Well, on video 6, I found this video by the Bazillions. It's fast. The animations are exciting. It feels like I'm watching Paw Patrol, but with weird, different little bichos. And it's way too hard for my students. If I give them this video alone, if I just send this out to the class WhatsApp and say, watch the video, it's like really, really fast and they're singing and the kids are going to come to class and they're going to say, profe, es que yo no entendí nada. So I can't just give this video alone. I need to give a specific task with it. Something that makes this challenging video exciting and accessible to students. And then I have an idea. This video imagines who, what, when, where, and why as 5 secret detectives in a secret detective agency. And so I think I could tell my students, class, I'm going to share with you a secret video about secret detectives who have a secret identity. And I want you to try and discover what the secret identity of each detective means. Their secret identity is written on their shirt. You're going to watch the video for clues and see how many secret identities you can discover. And you're going to use this clue sheet as well. And so I give my students a worksheet that has some really slow static input. I found this by going to Google Images and typing in WH question word flashcards, and it was free. So I send both of these out to my WhatsApp and say, okay, chicos, use the clue sheet and the video to see how many secret identities of the secret detectives you can discover. And that is me flipping the start of the pre-task home. So my students do that before coming to class. They get to the point of going, yo creo que where significa donde? And then they come into class. And that student raises her hand and says, Profe, ¿verdad que where significa donde? Boom, she's clarified. She's ready to start moving towards controlled practice. So that's what I would go through in terms of taking this idea of flipping something and carrying it out towards a lesson plan. Now, from here, I'd go into what I know how to do. Get students into the classroom and doing some controlled practice activities that scaffold them towards the task, then giving them time to prepare and present their tasks in class. Now, I'm going to stop here because this is the topic we're going to dig deeper into in our next round of webinars. What are high-tech and low-tech ways to get students' input and interaction independently? So that's where we're moving to next. So if your question is, this sounds great and all, but my students don't have Wi-Fi, so they can't watch YouTube, I have ideas for you, but we've run out of time. So that's where we're going to come to next. I want to give you some things to think about and explore independently as you consider seeing how independent work comes up in your classroom. And when we come back together next time, we'll go more into this step 3 of what are the strategies and techniques? What websites can I go to for interactive games? Where can I find things to print out for my students who don't have internet at home? What do I do if I don't even have a printer? All across that spectrum, how to get input and interaction going at home. Now, you might have seen that in chat, we've started sending out a link to our attendance and survey. If you want to click on that link and start filling out the survey now, you can. We're in the final portion of our webinar where we're just going to be wrapping up, doing some question and answers. So if you want to click on that link, we'd love for all of you to fill that out. I see 64 of you here right now, and it's wonderful to have so many teachers together. Please, all of you, take the time to fill out that survey. Again, it helps us tell other people how many wonderfully curious teachers we have in this region. So that people who want to support you know you're here and they can create more opportunities like this that you have access to. So if you've enjoyed this webinar at all and you want more like it, take 5 quick minutes to fill out that attendance and survey. Where I'm at thinking about these topics is these 2 key takeaways. This is what I've been thinking about and trying to notice in my classrooms as I've been teaching. First, I've been really reconsidering what parts of a lesson cycle will be effective independent work. I think I can notice when something that I give my students to do at home isn't effective. Everyone comes back in and is like, es que yo no pude, and it's the whole class. And I realized that wasn't effective independent work. So I'm really going back to the basics and considering what are those easy moments of the class that are effective independently, that my students, even who don't have parents, can do. Because while it might be helpful to have a parent there if a parent is a good support and a good teacher, if the parent takes the handout and just does it for the student because the parent wants the student to get all the points, because they want them to qualify for the good technical next year, well, that student is also not being helped by that independent work. That's not effective either. So really getting something that's independent really puts the student at the center. How can a parent cheat and help a student do the task if the task is watch the video and write down 3 questions about dogs? Well, the parent can't come up with those questions. Read this article and underline the words you don't know. The parent can't do that. It's a pre-assessment of knowledge. So these kinds of independent tasks are things that are effective at home. And it's going to make the most out of that 15 to 60 minutes that I get with my students each week through a distance. The other big takeaway I'm thinking about is that students can discover new language outside of class. A majority of the vocabulary I've learned in Spanish has come from the best and most affordable teacher I've ever found. That teacher is the app Spanish Dict. I have learned so many more words from just being out in the world, in the pulperia trying to buy something and I need a new word, right? In my real language learning, so much of the discovery of new words happens when I'm alone. And that's something I can give to my students too. I can let them discover new language at home, and then to get them to bring back evidence of their homework, they can bring in questions, curiosities, those practice sheets I was talking about. I want to reward students for doing homework. Giving points for work done at home is me using extrinsic motivation to try and help students develop a habit of practicing English at home. I know that if my students are going to be successful language users by the time they graduate high school, they need to be practicing independently. They're not going to become fluent just doing things in class and going home and doing nothing. So if I can help students build skills to work independently, I'm setting them up long-term for success. And I want to move beyond saying the only evidence that students bring in is correct answers. Do the math problems at home and bring in the right numbers. Because that is using homework as assessment. It's one of the things I can do. My student is alone, I'm going to assess them. But if I'm assessing them, I'm right at the edge of their ability, which means I might be a little bit too hard if it's a good assessment. Where my students are making errors, that's their independent level. So if I do only assessment homework, all of my homework is going to feel a little bit too hard. If I let my students bring in questions, bring in new word lists, bring in a practice sheet that their mom signs that says, on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I practiced 10 minutes on the class Quizlet. And so I've done 30 minutes of independent video game practice. And my mom signs it so that I think, oh, I have to really do it. And now I'm letting students show other kinds of evidence. I'm also curious what's on your mind. As you continue filling out that attendance survey, again, please click on that link in chat and fill out that attendance survey. I'm curious if anyone has any questions they want to ask to our group about accelerated learning or flipped learning.
Or any comments
comments
about
as well.
today. Yeah, what do you think?
Matt, so the point is to give students homework to do at home, so they can also practice at home. That's the point.
I think it's a wonderful thing to work towards. I know not all of my students or all of your students are going to do homework. There will be some students that don't. But I know that doing independent work is one factor that makes someone successful in language learning. And so if I want my student in their life, across the 10 years that they're learning language, to be successful, I need to help them build that skill of learning independently. So to me, this is all about asking that question, what can they do alone? And how can I have them do that? I think so much homework that we give students is too hard. It's just beyond what they can do alone. And that makes students frustrated and unsuccessful. And it makes the time ineffective. So yeah, what can students do at home effectively? Who else has a question or a comment or an idea to share around these topics? Like I mentioned before, we are going to have another webinar coming up where we'll go more into high and low tech resources for interaction and input outside of the classroom. Besides making independent work easy enough for them to do on their own, what other strategies could we develop for our learners to be more successful in this stage? I think that's a great question. To me, the shift towards more easy is accomplished by making it the start of the lesson, right? If they're doing the pre-task at home rather than the task, that's making it easier. So the earlier parts of the lesson really accomplish that, lowering the difficulty. I think another way that we can make our spaces differentiated in that independent space is when I'm having students work at home in terms of Quizlet or something like that, some kind of controlled practice activity. I can have students set a goal based on where they're at the end of our practice in class, right? They take a little mini quiz and they count how many questions they got wrong. And I say, okay, I want everyone in the class to practice for 10 minutes. And if you got questions wrong, it's a sign that you need a little bit of more practice to be ready for tomorrow. So I want you to do 1 extra minute of practice for all the questions you got wrong. Now, I don't love that idea. It's kind of punitive. It's using the practice as punishment. So I'd probably have to workshop that a little bit. But that's one thing I'd think about, is having students set different goals. Or maybe I have two different things available, right? Maybe I have students make flashcards to take home, and I say, okay, if you're feeling good with these words, I want you to look at the word that's written with letters, and I want you to try and remember how to say it in Spanish. Or no, if you're feeling lower, I want you to try and translate it into Spanish. And if you're feeling really great with these words, I want you to look at the other side first. Look at the picture and try to remember the word in English. So I might also give out two different tasks for at-home controlled practice and let students choose what's appropriate to them, or choose to do both, and give a little bit of adjustment in there so that what they're doing for at-home independent practice meets their independent needs. Ideas about a flipped classroom with access
Matt,
to
can
no
I just add
internet.
in a couple other ideas?
Yeah, of course, Mary.
I think, and Matt referenced this in what he was saying, but I think it's a really nice way to highlight this, to Marbella, to your question. I think we could do a lot more work in helping our learners keep learning logs or learning journals, and that would help them be more accountable in their independent work. So like what, and the parents as well. So Matt was mentioning, that the mom or dad would sign off saying they practiced X number of minutes with Quizlet or something like that. But you could have a learning journal or a learning log, or sometimes sort of a portfolio of what is all the work that I've done at home and how to notice that. So that's something a little different than some of the other strategies we mentioned, but I think that would be really powerful. And the kids, at least in Costa Rica, are used to having little notebooks that they bring, to school, and they go back and forth. So you could actually turn that notebook into something maybe interactive, in that sense that the child had to write down, choose 3 activities to do something at home, and they could, it could be the teacher could give a few choices, and then they could create their own type of activity. But really focusing on the learner autonomy work, I think, would make a big difference. So I'm quickly going to jump in for Rosaura. It was asking if we're going to upload the recording to the website. We're going to upload it to the Wakelet sometime in the next couple days. So that it'll be there. Yeah. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Marbella, for the question.
Looks like Juane has a question. Brigitte, is it Brigitte?
Would you like to ask a question? Yeah.
See if she can unmute. I saw her hand waving.
No las bulla, mamá. Good evening.
Hi.
Good evening. I am late with. I know this webinar so late. It's nice to meet you with images, but I feel nervous. I feel emotional. I feel very nervous, but I enjoy listen to when you speak. For me, is a little it's a problem to speak fluency, but it's a pleasure to listen to you. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing, Juane. I'm glad you took the time to be here and join us. Edgar, you have something you want to share?
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone.
Do you have something you want to share? If you have a question or comment, you're welcome to share it. Or if you just wanted to say hi, that's a great too.
Hi, Edgar. We're happy you're here.
Hi, Mary. How are you?
Good. Good. How did you like the webinar today?
Oh yeah, it's wonderful, wonderful, Mary. For me, it's a pleasure to be part of this. And I all the way from Nicaragua, Puerto Cabezas, Nicaragua.
Puerto Cabezas.
The internet is not too good, but well, we're trying to do our best. So for me, I learned a lot today, and from the exchanging ideas and the way of attending students. So for me, it's very important to be part of this, and well, hopefully have many webinars more that we can participate in these activities. So well, it's a pleasure for me to be part of this. So congratulations to all of you guys that are connected right now. Well,
Thanks,
have
Edgar.
a nice, yeah.
It's so nice to see you. Thank you so much. Edgar is
Okay.
from a very small town on the Caribbean coast of Nicaragua.
Yes, very small
Hey, y'all.
town.
So we only have 19 completed attendance forms, and there's still 53 of you here. If we could have the other 34 of you take the time to jump in and fill that out, it really helps us tell the story of you all and your interest and desire to be here. And it helps us create more opportunities like this. So we really want to know that you're here so that we can brag about your wonderful dedication. Really quickly at the end, while we still have a little bit of time left, I've been talking about choice, about giving independent learning tasks, about trying to make independent time more effective. And now I want to model it. I have 3 optional independent learning tasks for you. Like I said, we're going to come back in a few weeks for another round of webinars on a related topic. And between now and then, I want to give you a choice of one of 3 different projects. And I've tried to make them take different amounts of time. So if you're feeling really, really busy for the next couple of weeks and you're like, I don't have any extra time, maybe you choose project number 1 that only could take 15 minutes. And if you're feeling really creative and you really want to dive into this, maybe you choose project 3 that might take more like 2 hours. So here's what I would recommend as optional independent tasks that you can choose between. If you only have a little bit of time, I invite you to connect with a colleague. Talk with another teacher you know about the ideas from today that you found interesting. And share at least one link or resource from our Wakelet with that teacher. If you want, you can give them the whole link to Wakelet and they can come in and find our whole webinar. If you look in Wakelet, over in the 5th column on our page is all the materials from this webinar. This PowerPoint, all of the instructions about the different independent learning tasks, the video and handout from my sample lesson, everything's already here. So that's the first independent learning task. Connect with a colleague. If you have a little bit more time and you want to explore this topic more, I invite you to keep an independent work log. Choose one class that you're curious about and create a notebook where you will reflect on the effectiveness of all the independent work for that class. Every time that class does independent work, when they come back into class afterwards, add an entry to your journal. Take 2 or 3 minutes to jot down quick ideas about these 4 questions. Could students do the work? Did it help them advance towards their objectives? Did they offer any comments about the process? And in your opinion, do you think the independent work was effective? It's hard to reflect on independent work because we're not there when students do it. So this journal would be a way that you can collect observation about independent work. And then after a few weeks, start trying to notice patterns. What assignments were effective? How can you do more assignments like that? What assignments weren't effective with this group? And how can you do less? If you're really feeling curious, task number 3 is trying out a flipped lesson. I think this will take about an hour or more of planning time and then an hour of class time to do. But you're going to have to be in that class anyway. So it's really just like an hour of extra work. Just like we did, I recommend starting out by designing a task. And then once you have a task, choose the new language that students are going to discover, and then figure out how students can receive input and discover that language independently. And I would just flip out that first step. If you want to connect more with us at the Institute for Collaborative Learning, check us out on Instagram and Facebook between now and our next webinar. And you can see different video series and post series that we've got about connecting, relating, community, and teaching. And please make sure you fill out our attendance survey. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Before you go, make sure you've marked your attendance. We're really happy you're here. We're really appreciative of the time and energy you've taken to share. I also recommend saving this Wakelet as a bookmark. When we come back for our second webinar, we're going to just keep adding in columns. So everything related to these two webinars is going to be on this one web page. So this will be your one-stop shop for all things MEP webinars. Thanks so much, Marbella and Zinnia, for coming. It's been a pleasure having y'all here.
Thanks, Marbella. Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matt. I really appreciated the opportunity and being able to learn about the flipped classroom. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks for being here, Leonardo.
Thank you so much, teachers, Matt, Miss.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wanda.
It's a wonderful experience to be present in this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
I'm so curious, Junior. Can I put you on the spot?
Yeah, why not? Why
Well,
not?
I'm so curious. What did you think? Did it start to answer your questions?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, actually, I think it was like a very interesting way to already join it to what I have planned. So actually, in the way that the students can come like more prepared. At least I clearly understood that they have, well, they can encounter like the moment at home, well, at the independent stage that they're going to do, and then come with me and start on our way up from the clarifying moment. So thank you, Matt, and thank you, Mary, Ivan. Thank you so much for your kindness and all help and support.
Thanks. Let us know how it goes.
I will.
Thanks for your curiosity.